at teddenmark.com is a story by Ted Denmark, Ph.D., entitled Exoplanets and Billy Meier and the Pleiadians. Possibility of life on nearby exoplanets, and the curious case of Billy Meier and the Pleiadians. And Ted begins. In 1961, astrophysicist Frank Drake proposed his now famous Drake equation, in which he attempted to offer a logical series of factors that would give a probability for expecting to find intelligent life on nearby exoplanets in our galaxy. These factors, such as the number of stars likely to have planets, particularly Goldilocks planets, of just the right conditions of temperature and pressure to support the kind of life we have on Earth, were mostly little more than guesses or wagers, and the conclusion reached was very uncertain. Plus, it was linked to consideration of intelligent life that might eventually be discovered by using radio telescope detection, which was the beginning of SETI, the search for extraterrestrial intelligence. Expectations for receiving a positive indication of a non-random signal was tentatively left open, though most standard model scientists of the day really thought life on other planets was quite unlikely and could never reach Earth in any event, even if it did exist. So it was felt to be mostly a waste of time and money to plan research of this kind. This work was eventually handed off to the Space Sciences Lab at UC Berkeley, where I worked as a design engineer for several decades. I didn't work on this project myself, though I had friends who did, and it was interesting enough for most of us. But I don't think it very likely ITs were going to use radio frequencies for their broadcasts or conversations. Everyone felt that the vast distances and absolute limitation of the speed of light as a barrier left by Einstein were daunting obstacles to overcome. In a more recent revisioning of this probability, particularly now since the initial results of the illustrious Kepler telescope survey dedicated to initial discovery of exoplanets, are in a genius MacArthur Grant scientist at MIT named Sarah Seeger, has proposed an update of the Drake equation, now being called the Seeger equation, in which she is essentially sanguine that life of some kind will likely be found on some nearby exoplanets in our region of the Milky Way in the coming decade, based on looking at spectrographic analyses of what will be detected as atmospheric gases. Quite a number of mostly very large exoplanets have already been discovered by the Kepler probe before its recent breakdown. But 2 additional new space telescopes are expected to launch towards the end of this decade: the TESS, Transiting Exoplanet Satellite Survey, which launched quite a while ago, and the James Webb Telescope, which launched fairly recently, with a more highly sensitive cryogenic state-of-the-art spectrometer, extending the search and going to the next level of discovery, analysis, and integration. Billy Meier case. Yet even now, this transition to a more robust expectation for planetary hosts of life forms is still quite theoretical, with SETI continuing to filter signals from many terabytes of space noise. But what if there was already a body of evidence available, not only about intelligent life on other planets, as everyone now, in the second decade of Century 21, may be more willing to consider, but what of intelligent beings from another star system who might have already made their appearance on Earth, having left a rather remarkable detailed account of their intended mission? Impossible. However, such a story does exist, I would maintain, even if it was found to be too controversial when it happened in the late 70s, and subsequently for the couple of decades after it was reported. But in light of what we know nearly 40 years later, the question is, how might it play out now if it were to be re-examined? This was my question. As first I contemplated and later worked on re-editing and reissuing one of the most extraordinary publications of the latter half of the 20th century that I had ever found. A 4-volume series of books by the Dean of American UFO Studies, Wendell Stevens, called Message from the Pleiades, the contact notes of Edward Billy Meier, a meticulous transcript of a long series of reported contacts of the 4th or 5th kind, involving extensive interaction and actual collaboration with extraterrestrials from the Pleiades, a star cluster less than 50 light-years from Earth. Wow, that's pretty close, guys. I had no idea they were so close. This is the Billy Meier case, now largely unknown or forgotten. It was the most helpful account of a contactee report I was able to find around the same time when my own contactee experiences began, in the late 70s and early 80s. And I was very grateful to find these books among the flood of speculation, uncertain reportage, general weirdness and cynical disinformation to be found if one were looking for reliable information on the ET enigma. The problem was that Wendell's message books were attempted translations into English from a Swiss-German dialect, which had a raft of serious difficulties that seriously clouded the account being offered. The first private edition of 1,000 printed books, launched in the early 80s, was seen by only a small number of enthusiasts. And even though it received a great deal of initial publicity, conflict over the account given by Meier later became so heated that it finally fell largely unresolved into the oblivion of fear, uncertainty, and doubt. But now, through a series of improbable coincidences and 5 years of work, I've been able to render us a new second edition of the books in English, and would have a few short observations to offer. Thanks, guys. The main Billy Meier story, covered in these accounts, began in 1975, when he was contacted by a Pleiadian woman space navigator named Zemyaza, from the iconic and beautiful open star cluster called the Pleiades, or the Seven Sisters, consisting of about 250 stars in the constellation Taurus. As the primary Pleiadian liaison for Billy, she was an extraordinary and rather attractive younger woman who represented her group of resident space aliens from the planet Era in the star system Tegeta. Even though it was quite a new adventure for him, Billy had been prepared in various ways by these and other extraterrestrials from his earliest years for this encounter. The Pleiadians said they were able to travel to Earth from their home planet in about 7 hours. The account of why they chose Billy for this momentous contact mission is complex, but the immediate emergency in 1975 was that the halogen refrigerant gases, mostly chlorine and fluorine, that were being released in massive quantities into the Earth's atmosphere from hairspray bottles, and this is true, as well as being vented into the atmosphere from refrigeration equipment, were said to pose a deadly threat for the continuation of life on the planet in the future, because their reaction with the ozone layer in the upper atmosphere was producing an increasingly open large hole that would allow deadly ultraviolet rays to penetrate to the surface, causing increasingly dangerous organ damage, particularly to the eyes, as well as genetic mutations of both land and sea-based species. Even though this ozone emergency was addressed with some degree of success by many world governments in the immediate aftermath of these warnings, as dutifully issued by Meier to scientific researchers and governing bodies around the world. This Meier mission turned out to be about much more over the following nearly 40-year period. I will attempt to describe a few of the major aspects of this unique and fascinating encounter. Zemlyaza and her small group of Pleiadians, including her father and sister, who initially appeared to Billy, are said to actually look quite a lot like us, ordinary Earth humans, with whom they claim common ancestry, dating from a time in ancient prehistory, when their forebears first came to Earth and mingled with existing primitive Earth humans of the time, to create a hybridized race of Indo-Europeans or Caucasians in the areas where they still reside mostly today. According to Zemlyaza, the Adam and Eve of our biblical accounts were actually the earliest humans of this mixed race, with the ancient Pleiadians succeeded in producing an attempt in an attempt to genetically uplift the wild humans they found when they first reached the Earth in their initial exploratory survey more than 100,000 years ago. Their Pleiadian civilization is presented as a greatly advanced one compared to ours on Earth, both technologically and spiritually. They have had space travel already for what would seem like an impossibly long time for us, like many of the varied races in their region of the galaxy, with whom they made peace 50,000 years ago. These Pleiadians have returned to Earth again in this era, as their forebears have done many times in the remote past, now studying us again from the time of our 18th century Enlightenment, to help us regain the critical awareness and insight needed to help us avoid widespread self-destruction, as they have seen happen in various other technological civilizations coming to maturity, ones that developed thermonuclear weapons. The Pleiadians have a great advantage in their approach to understanding our universe, because not only have they achieved superluminal, hyperdimensional space travel, they have also learned how to time travel in their highly advanced beam ships. They indicated to Billy, and him alone as their sole dedicated contactee, that they have come to Earth from a time in the future, in order to assess whether Earth humans were ready to make contact again with extraterrestrials like themselves, in order to reap the abundant advantages, or whether we are still stuck in the lower to mid-levels of barbarianism, or barbarism, as the author says here.